Welcome to Food for Thought. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau from Compassionate Cooks. I founded Compassionate Cooks to empower people to make informed food choices and to debunk myths about vegetarianism and animal rights. You can learn more about who we are and what we do by visiting our website, compassionatecooks.com. I hope everyone out there is doing really well. It's so nice to hear from so many of you. I need an assistant just to keep up with your emails. I'm not kidding. And that's on top of teaching cooking classes and preparing for talks and writing my column for Veg News magazine, writing my articles for Satya magazine, my editorials for KQED radio, writing the newsletter, writing this podcast, recording, editing, and uploading this podcast, keeping the website updated, doing private consultations, writing a cookbook, testing recipes, fulfilling DVD and recipe orders, and attending to my cats when they insist that I pay attention to them instead of all of this. So if they can forgive me, I hope you can forgive me for not replying to your emails right away. This is why I haven't had a chance. But I plan on replying if you've written to me, so consider that a promise. Speaking of emails, today's podcast is sponsored by a lovely woman named Dina, and I say lovely not because I've ever met Dina, and not because she's sponsoring today's podcast, but because of an email she sent me. And by the way, I have a pretty strong sense of intuition, and I can detect a lot about you, even through email, so beware. And one thing I can definitely detect about Dina is that she's lovely. So now that I've thoroughly embarrassed you, Dina, thank you very much for your sweet email and your sponsorship. Dina thanked me for doing this podcast and said every time she hears it, she always feels very grateful and very inspired. She said a few more very lovely things, but if I read them, then I'd be the one to be embarrassed, not just Dina. So thank you, Dina. I feel incredibly grateful to be able to do this work, and I appreciate your sharing your thoughts with me. And thanks to all of you who've written to me as well. And thanks to all of you who posted comments on iTunes. And may I repeat, and I will say this over and over, I really encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, not just download the individual files. You can do this through iTunes or other podcatchers. One of the ways podcatchers, they're called, determine a podcast popularity is by the number of subscribers, not downloads. So when they see a podcast that has a lot of subscribers, they are more apt to promote it, and that's good news for the animals. It's good news for the message we're trying to get across. So please do subscribe to the podcast, and I'd love to see a huge jump in the number next time I check. And if you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at podcast@compassionatecooks.com. And if you're willing and able, please consider supporting the podcast. You can visit compassionatecooks.com and click on, there's a long button that says support our podcast. And anything you can do to help me continue this work is very, very much appreciated. A few years ago in Vegetarian Times magazine, they had a list called the 7 superfoods or something like that. And I always thought it was a helpful bit of information, so I modified it slightly and put it up on my website under resources. Under cooking and nutrition info, which you can still see there today. And to give you a snapshot of what those 7 superfoods were, they listed spinach, oats, tea, broccoli, soy, tomatoes, and blueberries. Now, I'm not a big fan of making certain foods out to be magical remedies for anything, not because certain foods aren't, because certainly, and we'll talk about some of them, they really have just a very powerful ability to heal, but because it makes it seem like other plant foods aren't as important. Do you know what I mean? In other words, I don't choose my meals as carefully as some might think is necessary, because what I am choosing from is a really wholesome, healthful group of foods. So I don't think about what I'm eating at each meal. I don't think, I got to get my antioxidants or I have to get my lycopene, just because everything I'm choosing from tends to be high and rich in antioxidants or protein or essential nutrients. I mean, whatever it is, the foods that I eat all the time are those foods that are rich in all of these things. So I hope that makes sense. Now, having said that, I do have some favorite foods. And though I can't list all of them here right now, and because I will do another show on this, and because people like neat little lists of the top 5 this and the top 10 that, I thought I would share with you my top 5 favorite foods, why they're beneficial, why I love them, and some tips for preparing them. So here they are. Let me just tell you what they are first, and then we'll go into great detail about them. They are quinoa. I feel like I need a drum roll at this point. I need a drummer. Okay, nothing. So, okay, here are my top 5. Quinoa, and we'll get back to what quinoa is and how to spell it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just hold tight. Kale, tempeh, blueberries, and green tea. And when I say favorite, I mean these are foods that I would be really, really sad if I had to live without. I mean, I go into a kind of like blissful state when I eat or drink these foods, and I eat almost all of them every day. I definitely drink tea every day. So you can imagine how blissful I am eating these foods all the time. If I were on a desert island, these are the foods I would want with me at all times. I'm not kidding. Forever and forever, I could just eat them all the time. Now, I would need a blender to make the blueberry smoothie, and I would need a steamer basket to make my kale and tempeh, and I would need a pot to make my quinoa and a teapot for my tea. But otherwise, I would be all set on that desert island. Well, I would need a few other things to help flavor some of them. But anyway, you get the point, right? Now, 5 years ago, well, it may not have been 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, these foods would not have been on my list, okay? I mean, there was a time when my top 5 list would have been probably like Boca burgers, potato puffs, you know, those little tater tots that are really crispy and yummy and greasy, bagels, you know, all vegan, but not exactly the nutrition powerhouses as the others I just named. And for those of you who don't know my background or history, there was definitely a time when my top 5 list would have been chicken breasts and salmon and scrambled eggs. I used to like hard-boiled eggs. My mom used to make poached eggs, and lots of ice cream, dairy-based ice cream. My father owned ice cream stores, so we had a lot of ice cream, and we had a lot of friends too. It was really nice. I don't think the ice cream had anything to do with the number of friends we had, but you know, it was nice to have that many friends. We really did. We had a freezer just for all of the ice cream, and he would bring home these tubs, huge tubs, not like half gallons. It was like tubs of ice cream. So I just want to let you know, I want to give you some hope that our palates definitely changed, but we have to be willing to give them time to adjust. You may have heard me say this before, but we don't crave the flesh of an animal. We're not true carnivores. We can pass by cute little squirrels and cute little birds and, you know, deer grazing in the grass without wanting to jump on them and eat them. We don't crave the flesh of an animal, but we do crave fat and we do crave salt. So if that's what our palates are used to, then that's all we're ever going to crave. But if we start lessening those things and taking those things out of our diet and start putting in different things, we really do stop craving all that crap. I say crap. We start craving all that. We stop craving all that crap because it's crap. So I just want you to know, I want you to trust me when I say that there was a time that I wouldn't have thought that I would have reached nirvana merely by a piece of steamed kale or a forkful of quinoa, but it's true. I really do. Okay, enough about my nirvana. Let's talk about quinoa. Quinoa is spelled, ready? Are you ready do you have a pen? Okay. Quinoa is spelled Quinoa. It's from Peru. It's a Peruvian grain. It grows in the mountains of South America, including Bolivia. Bolivia also has some crops and a little bit in Ecuador as well. And it may go by other names in South America. In the United States, you can find it in any natural food store. It's also available at Compassionate Cook store. I've talked about this before. If you go to CompassionateCooks.com and click on Stock Your Pantry, you'll go to Compassionate Cooks' Amazon store, basically, and I'm constantly building it and adding all of my recommendations for kitchen items and books and food, too, that you can't get, that might not be available to you. So you can find it in your natural food store, but if you can't, it's at CompassionateCooks.com. And the most common variety is just white. It's a beautiful white quinoa, but there's also red and black quinoa, which is absolutely gorgeous. Now, I think I've already said that it was a grain, and for all intents and purposes, it is a grain, but technically it's really the seed of a plant that we're eating. The Incas considered it sacred and referred to it, I love it, they referred to it as the mother of all grains. It is the mother of all grains, and I totally agree with them. It's a really beautiful grain that's very small. It's not as small as amaranth, but it's about the size of millet. Little bigger than millet. Millet is kind of yellow. Quinoa is kind of this beige off-white color. And if you don't know what millet looks like, just take a look at the bird seed that you put in your bird feeder. Millet's often the main seed in that variety. Back to quinoa. Not a big fan of millet, so let's talk about quinoa, the mother of all grains. So it's this tight little seed when it's uncooked. But when it's cooked, it totally changes in appearance and it turns into this beautiful translucent little grain. It's so pretty. And the ratio of grain to water when you're cooking it is about 1 cup of grain to 2 or 3 cups of water. I usually put in a little extra water, and I always throw in a little vegetable bouillon cube in the water whenever I cook any kind of grain, just to add some flavor. And let's see, you can either boil 2 cups or 3 cups of water, and when it boils, you can throw your quinoa in the pot and let it simmer for about 10 or 15 minutes. It's one of the great benefits of quinoa. Of course, brown rice and all those other wonderful rices are also very healthful, but they take a lot longer to cook. Quinoa cooks in 10 or 15 minutes. And so obviously once the quinoa absorbs all the water and is fluffy and translucent, then it's done. But you can also just throw the quinoa and the water in together, which is what I do sometimes, and just let it come to a boil together. And then same thing, 10, 15 minutes. Now, one thing to keep in mind about quinoa is that it contains a substance called saponin, S-A-P-O-N-I-N, saponin, and that's basically the plant's own defense against birds when it's a plant. So it's supposed to be rinsed off by the time it gets to the consumer, but it isn't always. So it can have a bit of a bitter edge to it, and the easiest way to remedy this is just to put the quinoa in a fine sieve before, a little fine strainer before you cook it. So just throw it in a strainer, throw it under some running water for about a minute or 2 before cooking it. And that's all you have to do. You're just rinsing off that bitter substance. Okay. Now, once it's cooked, you can enjoy it in many ways. Personally, my favorite way is just eating it plain, just eating it because it's so good. It's a good snack and it's a great quick lunch. And just kind of eat. I could steam some vegetables with it or whatever. If you need a quick lunch, one thing you can also do is while it's cooking, you can do this, or you can just stir it in afterwards. You can throw in some frozen, I would thaw them first, or canned, drained corn, just a quick can of corn, drain it, any kind of vegetables you can just throw into the quinoa while it's cooking, and some beans you can mix together. It makes a great quick lunch. Now you can also use it as a base for a stir fry. But it's a bit of a delicate grain, meaning it's a lot less hearty than rice, for instance, than brown rice. So consider that when you're choosing the sauce or the dish that you want to plate on top of the quinoa. I don't think everything goes with quinoa in terms of, stir fry and plating it on top of the quinoa. One thing you can do is make tabbouleh with quinoa instead of using bulgur wheat. Tabbouleh is that Middle Eastern wonderful salad that has parsley and garlic and tomatoes and lemon juice. And on that note, quinoa is gluten-free, so it's a boon for those who can't digest gluten. It's just amazing. It's like the mother of all grains in every way. It's gluten-free, and so you can just use quinoa. And then there's also quinoa flour. So again, if you can't digest gluten, you can just use quinoa as your flour base. You can also eat it as a breakfast food, just as you would oatmeal or cornmeal. You just cook it, like I said before. Perhaps you wouldn't put the bouillon cube in, and when it's cooked, you can stir in walnuts or almonds, berries, and brown sugar, and maybe add a little bit of non-dairy milk with it as well. And it's just delicious. Anything you do with it, it's just really fantastic. Now, if you remember our lesson on protein, you remember I talked about how protein is made up of amino acids, and all foods contain amino acids. All foods, people, contain amino acids. Now, some foods have higher amounts of amino acids than others, and hence the myth that we have to combine our foods in one meal, which we don't because it's a myth. Remember that. But here's something about quinoa that I think you'll find interesting, is that it is a complete protein, meaning it has all of the amino acids contained in this precious little seed. All of it. So it's a complete protein. Now, not that you have to obsess over protein, and you don't have to, and you shouldn't, but I just wanted to let you know that quinoa is an example of a high protein food, complete protein. And so anyway, I could say so much more about quinoa, but we've got to move on because we wouldn't have any time for my other favorite food, which is kale. Now, I love kale. I really do. And I know some people don't like kale because they think it's bitter, and we'll talk about some ways to cut that bitter edge, but kale is just amazing. And I know you've heard it a million times, but you ignore it, that dark green leafy vegetables are probably one of the most nutrient-dense foods we could eat. And I recommend that you eat them every day. And when I say dark green leafy vegetables, that means kale or collard greens, chard, chicory, spinach, mustard greens, beet greens, escarole, all those dark leafy greens. There's a lot to choose from, and you should definitely be eating these every day. So what's so great about these vegetables? Well, they're typically low in calories, like most plant foods. They're low in fat. They're high in protein per calorie. They're very high in dietary fiber. They're high in iron, and they're very high in calcium. And of course, they're also very high in the phytochemicals such as vitamin C, vitamin A, lutein, and folic acid. So they're just packed with nutrients. And I know we've talked about this before, and I'm just going to recap really quickly, but you do have to go back and listen to the episodes entitled Skipping the Middleman and Where Do I Get My Calcium If I Don't Drink Cow's Milk? But in short, remember that the reason cow's milk is purported to have high amounts of calcium is because they're getting it from the ground. The cows are getting the grass, they're eating the grass, and they're eating the calcium that way. Calcium is an essential nutrient, which means that we have to get it from a food we eat, and cows get calcium because they eat grass. Well, they're supposed to be eating grass, but since they're confined on dry lots, they're actually not eating grass, so their feed is supplemented, which is why you have to go listen to the other episodes. So basically, you can be as smart as the cows and get your calcium from the green stuff that grows in the ground. It's a mineral, after all, and that's where minerals are found, in the ground, not in cows. You will never hear a chemist tell you that minerals are found in cows. Minerals are found in the ground. So this is why you should be eating all these green leafy vegetables. So how should you eat this stuff? Well, there's like a million things you can do with it. You can make a salad. You can use spinach and arugula, even raw kale. Some people love raw kale. It tastes great. Just mix them in a salad with different kinds of vegetables. Add tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, and whatever else you want to put in, some beans. And though green leafy vegetables have a high amount of iron, like I mentioned before, our bodies absorb it better when that iron is eaten with vitamin C. So that gives you a good reason to have a green salad with tomatoes or with a citrus vinaigrette or, with lemon juice or something like that. So you're adding the vitamin C to help increase the absorption of the iron. Okay. So that's salads. You can make a wrap, you can get a nice lavash or a tortilla, or even just use kale. You can use like big leaves of these green leafy vegetables, or you can use nori, seaweed, and make a wrap. Throw some of your favorite vegetables in, some steamed tempeh, tofu grains, a nice little sauce that will add flavor, spinach, arugula, and lots of good stuff. You can add it to soup. One of my favorite things in the world. See, I get really excited. People who take my cooking classes know how excited I get about food. One of my favorite things in the world is a garlic and green soup that I make. So it's like a head of garlic and a ton of greens, and I also throw potatoes in. It's one of the most delicious healing soups ever on the planet, I think, actually. So if you want, I think it's in my recipes section. I have an online cookbook, and you can buy packages of recipes and little packages of 5. And so there's one for soups and stews, and I think the garlic and green soup is in there. It's just fantastic. So, you can throw it in any soup at all. You can make either a green soup or just throw it in soup, and it comes out like butter. It just melts in your mouth. Non-dairy butter, okay? I can say that. But the point is that it melts in your mouth. It's just really tender and really yummy. You can add it to a stir fry. You can add these chopped leafy greens to a stir fry. Any stir fry you make, a tempeh stir fry, tofu stir fry, whatever vegetables you throw in, make sure you're throwing some of these green leafy vegetables in as well. I know some people who throw it in their smoothie. You can make, obviously you can make really healthful shakes and smoothies, and you can throw kale in. Steaming it is one of the things I do probably daily, and it's so easy and it's so delicious. And one of the things about kale is, or any of these dark leafy greens, they often have a very thick stem, and so you just pull off the leaves away from the stem, and so you're just eating the tender leaves. If you like the thick stem, then just leave it on, but basically pull the leaves away from the heavy stem and just compost that, and just get your handy dandy steamer basket and steam up those leaves. Now they will shrink, so you just stuff them into the pot and trust that they're going to shrink down when they cook. And don't forget to put the water in the bottom of the pot. And just steam the greens for about 10 minutes, depending on the texture you like. One of my favorite dishes is really easy, and it can be eaten warm or room temperature. So in a bowl, you take that steamed kale and you add some apple cider vinegar, some lemon juice, and some agave nectar. Agave nectar is a wonderful liquid sweetener that you can find in any natural food store, also at compassionatecooks.com, and it has the consistency and flavor of honey, but no bees were harmed in its production. So, and there's no risk of botulism, which is pretty cool. Anyway, toss all of those things together and just find the right ratio between the sweetness of the agave and the vinegar, the tartness and the sour vinegar and lemon juice. And it's just fantastic. I eat this several times a week, and so far I'm not sick of it yet. So that's what I recommend to you. Though I do love blueberries and can sit and eat them as a snack, I would say that my favorite way of eating blueberries is in my breakfast smoothie. And this is how I start every day. The few times I've missed my smoothie for some crazy reason, I'm like messed up all day. So it's just the best way to start off the day. And just as a quick aside, we talk a lot about kitchen gadgets and appliances in my cooking classes, and I do recommend that people invest in a food processor, particularly a KitchenAid, because the KitchenAid has a large bowl and a large blade and a small bowl and a small blade, and it just speeds everything up in the kitchen. And I'm really not trying to sell you stuff, but compassionatecooks.com, I recommend the KitchenAid there, and you can just purchase it that way, and you can see exactly which model I recommend. But my blender is also indispensable. I use my food processor for so many things, but the blender, the only thing I use the blender for is to make my smoothies, and I really could not live without this. Now, like I said, you can eat fresh blueberries and eat them, in season, obviously, which is great. But the next best thing is to eat them frozen, and you can even get them when they're in season and freeze them yourself, and then you have, seasonal blueberries all the time. Now, I'm not kidding when I say that my freezer contains pretty much only frozen fruit and some ice cubes. I think there's some ice packs in there and some blocks of tofu and then my ground flax seeds. But that's pretty much what the freezer consists of, because me and my husband, we both have smoothies every morning. Now, you can use any type of fruit, but my preference is blueberries and a few strawberries thrown in for good measure. I don't know how much, a half a cup to a cup of blueberries, a few strawberries, a banana, some non-dairy milk. Almond is my favorite. A little bit of orange juice, a couple tablespoons of ground flaxseed. And if you want a really special yummy smoothie, I also throw some almond butter in there, like a tablespoon or two of almond butter, which is just unbelievable. It's just too yummy for words, so I can't even discuss it. Anyway, blend it up and just grab a straw. Anyway, a quick tip about bananas. Buy several bunches when they're really, really ripe, which you'll often pay less for, since most groceries, well, the small groceries, the good ones, mark down the price because they want to get rid of them because they're just super ripe. So get a bunch of these ripe bananas, and when you get home, spend about 5 minutes just peeling the bananas, breaking the bananas inside into chunks, and throwing them into a freezer bag and stick them in the freezer. And use a few chunks, I don't know, like the equivalent of one banana or so, every time you make your smoothie. It makes it really nice and really thick, and you don't have to worry about always having bananas on hand. It might take a little longer to puree in the blender, but whatever, it's worth it. Just do some dishes or something. So I'm sure most of you know about the health benefits of blueberries. You hear about it all the time, but are you listening? Are you eating a cup of blueberries a day, which is recommended? Blueberries, especially wild ones, which again I've seen in the store when you get the frozen blueberries. I've seen wild blueberries contain antioxidants that have been found to reduce the risk of some cancers. At the 2004 International Conference on Longevity, a group of researchers released details of a study that suggests that certain compounds found in blueberries and some similar fruits, including cranberries, have a significant impact on reducing the degradation of brain functions, such as Alzheimer's disease and other conditions. So, there's just like a million reasons to eat blueberries, and about a cup a day is what you want to kind of shoot for. And just another note about organic. I do encourage people to buy organic as much as possible for a million reasons, but when it's not possible, and sometimes it isn't always possible, one thing that's good is, I think it's the Environmental Working Group that has these little cards, they have them on their website, that have the Dirty Dozen, which are the crops that are most highly sprayed. And it's really helpful to know this at those times when you can't choose organic and you think, well, if I can't get organic, is it okay if I get non-organic? And knowing which vegetables, which fruits are highly sprayed helps you make this decision. So blueberries are an example of a crop that is not very highly sprayed. So when it comes down to making that choice, you can get away with getting non-organic blueberries. Strawberries, not so much. Highly sprayed, you always want to get organic strawberries. So it just helps to kind of know that. Go to the Environmental Working Group's website and you can find that card and that list yourself. Or if you just type in the Dirty Dozen organic, you'll find that list. Okay. My next favorite food is tempeh. in an interview once, someone asked me to choose between tempeh and tofu. And I thought that was really mean because it's really hard to do. It's really hard to choose because I love both of them very much. But if I had to choose, and don't tell tofu this because I feel really bad, but if I had to choose and I don't want to be disloyal to tofu, I think I'd have to choose tempeh. Okay, so tempeh. Okay, so I don't think he heard tofu. It's really early in the morning, so you just have to bear with me. Tempeh is amazing. Whenever I demonstrate recipes in my cooking classes with tempeh, and I make a point to, about 40% or more of the people have never heard of tempeh. They've never eaten it. They've never cooked with it. And I love it because I love introducing this food to people. And tempeh is basically a staple in Indonesian cuisine. It's been around for hundreds of years, and it basically is fermented soybeans. So let me just tell you the difference between tofu and tempeh. You have a soybean, you have a whole soybean, and if you ferment that whole soybean with some kind of a grain, and that grain is usually rice, you create this cake of tempeh. That's tempeh. Fermented soybeans with some kind of grain. I know that doesn't sound like really appetizing, fermented anything, but you know, it's really good. Tofu is basically taking that whole soybean, boiling it down to make a liquid, you know, basically a soy milk, and then adding a curdling agent to create the consistency that you want, whether you want a firm or a soft or a silken tofu. So tempeh is a little less processed than tofu because that whole bean is still intact, okay? So that's basically the difference. The health benefits of tempeh tends to contain B12. We've talked about this before on the B12 episode. Well, I still want people to get B12 in a multivitamin or in just an individual supplement. But more than that, it's higher in protein, it's higher in fiber, and it's lower in fat than tofu. And so that's just, you know, a little bit of information there about that. Preparing tempeh. You can do many things with tempeh. It's very versatile. It's not as versatile as tofu, like, you know, when you make desserts and those kinds of things with tofu, but it's very versatile. You can saute it, you can grill it, you can bake it, you can steam it, grill it. I say grill, whatever. You can do a lot of things with tempeh. You can just steam tempeh and just kind of eat it at that point and make that a salad, or throw it in chili, throw it in stir fries, throw it in soup, throw it in salads, make sandwiches out of it, stews out of it. There's just a number of things you can do with it. And tempeh has a really wonderful flavor that I think is kind of nutty and a wonderful texture. It freezes well. Now, one tip that I always give to people, which I think really works, because I've heard a lot of people say, wow, I really had tempeh at this restaurant. I really liked it. It was delicious. I got home, I tried to make it, and it was a complete failure. And one of the ways that people consider it a failure is because it can just be a little bitter, kind of have a bit of an edge to it. And one way to lessen that and soften that is by cooking it first. And what I do is I steam it before I do anything else. So if I'm going to bake it, if I'm going to grill it, if I'm going to stir fry it, whatever I'm going to do to it, I steam it first. It takes 10 minutes to steam. It doesn't take that long at all. Again, get your handy dandy steamer basket out and just steam it, cube it, you know, slice it up, whatever you're going to do with it, just steam it first. You can also put it in a broth and just kind of cook it that way for about 30 minutes, but I think it takes longer, although you will get a lot more flavor if you do that. One of my favorite ways to eat tamari, well, I have like a million favorite ways to eat tempeh. I'm thinking of tamari because this is one of my favorite dishes, is to steam it up. And then get a saute pan, get a little bit of oil, put a little bit of oil in there, and just start, you know, frying up your steamed cubes of tempeh, or just long slices. You can just do that. And start just getting them golden brown on both sides. And then you just add a little bit of tamari, which is a soy sauce, and a little bit of maple syrup. And it totally like caramelizes the tempeh. It's just fantastic. So that's one of my favorite ways, but there actually are more recipes if you went to compassionatecooks.com and went to demystifying tofu and tempeh under online cookbook or recipes or something like that. You can find some more. So before I bore you completely, I want to talk about tea. Tea is one of my favorite things in the whole world. And when I say tea, I do mean green tea. I've never had a cup of coffee in my life, ever. I took a sip of it once when I was a teenager or something, and someone said, taste it, and I tasted it, and I was like, this is really gross. I don't like it. And they said, oh, it's an acquired taste. And I said, well, why would I want to try to acquire the taste of something that I think is gross? I know for all you coffee lovers, this is blasphemous. I'm not saying coffee is bad in and of itself. I'm just saying I don't like it. And I'm a tea drinker, and I'm a bit of a tea snob, to be honest. And my husband just got me a Tea of the Month Club gift, which was really sweet. So I'm going to be getting tea every month, which I already do, but now it's just going to come to my door, which is really wonderful. Of course, there's a lot of evidence that green tea is good for us. There are a lot of antioxidants in the green tea, and there's a lot of evidence that it also helps reduce heart disease. But it doesn't give you the extreme highs and lows that coffee does. And though I know I'm not saying this from experience because I've never had coffee, I've seen what it does to people. I know what coffee does to people. And I can tell you what green tea doesn't, there's not this extreme high and low, but there is a nice, just a good feeling. It's just a really good feeling. And my favorite teas happen to be the Japanese teas. I really like kukicha and genmaicha and gyokuro and hojicha. But I do love Chinese teas as well, and those are like the Dragonwell, jasmine pearls, those kind of teas. So just go try one. Try a Dragonwell. It's a really basic, simple green tea, and a lot, try it I mean, if you're drinking sweet coffee or sweet tea, it might be jarring at first, but it's just so fantastic. I used to drink a lot more black tea, but now I really only do it as a treat because I do sweeten my black tea. I never sweeten my green tea, but because I put sugar in my black teas are like English breakfast or Earl Grey or Irish breakfast or masala chai, something like that. I tend to consider it kind of a treat. And, one of the other reasons I love drinking tea is for the ritual itself, just stopping and, boiling the water and smelling the tea leaves and steeping the tea leaves and just finding a quiet place to drink it. Now, I rarely do that because of all those things I named before. I'm either on the computer or in my kitchen, but it's something I aspire to. I'm really sorry. I hope you're still out there with me. I thought it would be one of the shorter episodes, but there's so much to say. I really hope that some of this information is helpful to you. I could have just named my favorites and then moved on, but I wanted to give you helpful tips that I hope were helpful on actually preparing and eating these foods, which really are the foods that you should consider eating every day. If this is helpful information, please consider sponsoring the podcast. One of the benefits is receiving a recipe or two, and you can specify the garlic and green soup if you like. Again, just go to CompassionateCooks.com and check out Support Our Podcast. There's a button that says Support Our Podcast. And thank you very, very much for whatever you can do. I'm going to end with a little story, very short little story. I have a couple tea-related prints from Taiwan hanging in my dining room. I'm telling you, I love tea. So I have these prints, and one is a depiction of a happy little man squished inside of a teapot, and its meaning is twofold. One is that it's based on an old fable about a man who loved tea so much that he went to live in a teapot. I love that, and I think I'll be joining him soon. The other meaning of this is based on a teaching that says if you love something enough, throw your entire self into it completely. My wish for you is that you find your very own teapot and surround yourself with everything and everyone you love. For the animals, human and non-human, this is Colleen from Compassionate Cooks. Thanks for listening.